Your first concern is not hiring a lawyer, but is getting the health care that you need.
Do you know what to do if you're a pedestrian and you're hit by a car? Well, that's what we're going to ask this time on Ask the Lawyer. Hi, I'm Rob Rosenthal with AskTheLawyers.com. My guest is attorney Rebeccah Graham of the Maxwell Graham firm in the Seattle, Washington area. Rebeccah, thank you for making some time to answer our questions today.
Absolutely. Good morning.
So let's talk about someone walking down the street, crossing the street. They're a pedestrian. They're struck by an automobile. Let's start. What are their options? As far as recovery, what can they do?
Well, the best thing to do if you're hit by a car, obviously, would be to call 911. People who have been hit by a car, they can easily suffer catastrophic injuries, broken bones, torn ligaments. They can also suffer a traumatic brain injury, which a lot of people are unaware of initially. And so they definitely need to be checked out. So the first thing to do is call 911. An ambulance will come to the area, the scene of the collision, and check out the person who is hit. And if need be, take that person to the hospital. I think it's always a good idea if you're hit by a car to go to the emergency room and get checked out, even if you think that you're feeling fine.
Sometimes you may think you're fine, but you're not, whether there's a rush of adrenaline or whatever may happen. Should they then at that point, Rebeccah, contact a personal injury attorney?
Well, I always recommend if you've been injured in a collision, if it's a pedestrian automobile collision, you should contact a personal injury attorney. You can likely, a lot of times people who are injured don't realize the extent of their injuries for some time. So sometimes it's obvious that you're badly injured and you're hospitalized, you're in the emergency room, you've got broken bones. It's obvious, but a lot of times people who have been injured, it takes them a while, days, sometimes even weeks, to realize the extent of their injury. I'm not saying that everybody immediately, the day that they're hit, needs to go out and hire a personal injury attorney, but it's a good idea after a week or two to contact someone and get some advice about how you should proceed. You should be able to, well, there are lots of different options. But your first concern is not hiring a lawyer, but is getting the health care that you need. So I'd like to talk a little bit about how to get health care.
Okay.
Because if you're hit by a car, what most states, and Washington State is among them, Washington State automobile insurers have what we call personal injury protection insurance. It's commonly known as PIP insurance. In some states, it's called no-fault insurance.
Okay.
Depends on the state. But if you're hit by a driver who is covered by personal injury protection insurance, their PIP insurance will take care of your medical bills up to the extent of their coverage. It's important to know, though, that if you have a vehicle and you have personal injury protection, PIP insurance, then your PIP insurance will also cover your medical bills. And so if the driver that hit you does not have PIP insurance, but you do, that's great, because your PIP will cover your medical bills up to the extent of your coverage. But if the driver that hit you does have PIP insurance, his or her insurance will cover you. And then you might even have a second layer of insurance with your own PIP coverage. So I would just say, as a little tag or a little recommendation for people, which is always make sure that you have PIP insurance. It's really important. It's no-fault insurance. It covers your bills in the case of a collision. And so it's most important to me that you get health care. Getting money down the road through a lawyer and resolving your case is great. But the most important thing for you is to get your health back.
What about if the pedestrian is partly at fault? Is there what's the rule there in Washington State? Is there some? You tell me.
Sure, absolutely. So, important thing is, if you're a pedestrian, try to be in the crosswalk. Washington State has very strong crosswalk rules. If you are a pedestrian and you're hit in a crosswalk, the presumption is that the driver that hit you is at fault. Now, there are some very mild, very small exceptions to that rule. If you run out in front of a car, you could be found to be 100% at fault in Washington State. But if you're in a crosswalk and you're hit by a car, the presumption is that the car is at fault. If you're not in a crosswalk, The presumption still is that a car has a duty to see you and be paying attention and looking out for you. But you're going to be more at risk, obviously, if you're not in a crosswalk. Washington has some really strong crosswalk rules, though. And so even if you're crossing the street not in a marked crosswalk or with a light, if you're at an intersection, that intersection is considered a crosswalk. Now, that doesn't mean that you should step out into an unmarked crosswalk without paying any attention to the traffic around you. You should always be paying attention. But the presumption is if you're crossing the street in a crosswalk and you have the light, you have the right to assume that the cars will stop for you. So there are times, certainly, when a pedestrian can be considered partly at fault and sometimes even 100% at fault, such as what I described as we call it the dart out in front of traffic rule. But most of the time, the driver that hit you is more than likely to be found to be either 100% or at least partly at fault in causing a pedestrian auto collision.
What if the driver of the car doesn't have insurance, doesn't have the PIP coverage, and mine doesn't offer enough coverage to cover all my costs? What are my options then?
Well, again, goes back to have enough insurance that protects you. But if you don't have any automobile insurance yourself and a driver hits you and is uninsured, then there really is not much that a lawyer can help you with. And there's unfortunately not going to be any recovery in those circumstances. So if you don't have any automobile insurance, you're certainly running the risk that if you are hit as a pedestrian or you're driving a vehicle and you're hit by an uninsured driver, that you will not have any coverage. This applies for all of us. If you're a pedestrian, if you're in a car, if you don't have any insurance on your own, and then you're hit by someone who is completely uninsured, you might very well be out of luck. That doesn't mean you can't go after a person's personal assets if they hit you. So what we would call a tortfeasor would be someone who hits you. You could go after that person, that tortfeasor, a defendant is another way of putting that. You could go after that person's personal assets. But if you look at it from a common sense perspective, someone who's driving around without any insurance at all probably doesn't have a lot of assets. So that's going to be a hard place to recover.
That's a good point. Thank you so much. Lots of great, helpful information today, Rebeccah. I appreciate you answering our questions.
Sure. Thank you very much. If you've got anything else, I'm happy to answer them.
Great. Good to know. That's going to do it for this episode of Ask the Lawyer. My guest has been attorney Rebeccah Graham of the Seattle, Washington area. If you want the best information or you're ready to choose a lawyer that lawyers choose, make sure to go to askthelawyer.com first. And also, please take a sec to like, share, and subscribe by clicking on the button below. Thanks for watching. I'm Rob Rosenthal with AskTheLawyers.com.